correlation between religiosity and happiness.
Yes.
And it turns out that there is a moderate positive correlation between religiosity and happiness, meaning, for some of our viewers who don't know statistics, that on average, religious people are slightly happier than non religious people. But then to your question, I then want to assuage the people who are non believers. You're not doomed to being unhappy because you're non believers, precisely because, to your question, I can go and seek those awe inspiring spiritual moments in an infinite number of ways without them being couched in a supernatural narrative. This conversation is a spiritual experience. Me meeting a guy on the street who comes up to me as a fan who recognized me from somewhere, and then we are caught up in a serendipitous 30-minute communion that was unexpected, is a supernatural experience. So I can see divinity in the majesty of life without having to couch it in a supernatural. As a matter of fact, I think, maybe I'm wrong, that makes life that much more magisterial. The fact that I do right things not because I know that there is a judge who will either punish me. I do the right things because that's the deontologically correct thing to do. That makes me, I think, even a better person. I'm not doing it because I'm going to go to hell otherwise. And so I think that there are a infinite number of ways by which we can be spiritual, not in a new age kind of quackery sense, in a true existential sense, in ways by just us now looking at each other's eyes. We are caught up in a tango right now of, intellectual ideas that is magic. And I don't need to bring back Moses and the Ten Commandments to feel that divinity.
Mm. That's really interesting. Do you feel like, though, there's something going on in a modern context where, if we buy into the Nietzsche idea that God is dead, which I do, even though I can feel religion is coming back, but people are relating to it, I think, in a very different way. So I'll use Jordan Peterson
I
as
was
my
just going to say
example.
exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this really fascinated me. So pre-sickness, he's the internet's dad, and post-sickness is now on a religious arc.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it at first, and then I realized he sees something universal in religion that without that universal thing, that people tend to drift. And when there is no superseding, like really superseding everything else, where people believe, everyone believes that the God is in control, and that one ought to do the things that God commands. Once you get that, and I'm very much putting words in his mouth, and thankfully he's coming on the show in November, I think. But when you get hyperfragmentation, and that hyperfragmentation becomes a problem of its own. And so even though he has historically said that he doesn't believe, he's also
Yes.
worried about Richard Dawkins, for instance,
Yes.
continually
I've
pushing.
seen some of their little.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Look, so there are functional reasons why it makes sense to believe, right? So in other words, even as an evolutionist who is not much of a believer, I completely understand the reflex for why people need to believe. So in Richard Dawkins' case, I think he's being unnecessarily caustic in that he doesn't even allow what I just said, right? Religion sucks. It's for idiots. Let's move on. Whereas I say, look, religion makes a lot of false claims, but I get why people are religious. Now, the reason why I think in some cases religion is problematic is for the following. And actually, I have a chapter in The Consuming Instinct where I expand on what I'm about to say. Suppose you're a Martian that comes to Earth to visit, and you're shopping for the one true religion. I use the language of consumer psychology. And you start asking a bunch of questions so that you find out what is the position on each of the competing religions on that question. From the most banal question to the deepest and most profound question, I can find you two religions, if not many more than two religions, that prescribe the exact opposite prescription for each of those questions. So somebody's lying and somebody's not telling the truth. So in other words, the content of religion includes an insurmountable amount of bullshit. But the reflex to believe in something bigger than you is completely understandable, and I think that's what Jordan taps into. Does that make sense?
It does very much. Now, how do you deal with the act as if philosophy? So that was Jordan. I don't know if this is still how he explains it. I don't know if there's a God, but I act as if there's one. I think because of the organizing principle.
Yeah, Blaise Pascal, the philosopher and
The way
mathematician.
you say that.
You like that, huh? Ben, je parle français. Look, and I even
Ouais.
speak French.
Nice.
So even the French-speaking guy gets into trouble when he makes fun of the Quebec French. Shame on me. Shame on me.
I was there, but
self-flagellate.
I heard, for the record though, what you said was the way the Lebanese speak French, we're the Italians of the international French accent, something like that.
Yeah.
Like it's
I was
universally
speaking about for Arabic, that the Arabic dialect is the Italian.
Got it.
Yeah,
So close.
Yeah, but thank you for having listened to that. Blaise Pascal had a 2x2 matrix, if you like the original game theoretic argument. I don't know if you know. Do you know what game theory is?
Yes.
Briefly,
Loosely.
game theory. So think about, say, the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma is the classic game theory context, whereby the cops find two criminals that are working in cahoots. They separate them. I mean, as literally happens as a fundamental practice of policing, and then you take each one, and each of them can confess or not. So basically, it's a 2x2 matrix. Prisoner A can confess or not. Prisoner B can confess or not. So there are 4 possibilities, but they don't know. Prisoner A doesn't know what prisoner B is going to do, and vice versa. And therefore, depending on what ends up happening, there are different payoffs in terms of how much your sentence will be. If we both don't confess, we get off free. If I confess, but he doesn't, I get, and so on. Well, Blaise Pascal proposed an exactly same thing several hundred years ago, where he said, God could exist or not, and I can believe or not. And therefore, let's go through all of the 4 cells and then show that it is optimal to then believe. So that's the functional argument for why you should believe. If God exists and you believe, you're in good shape.
Right.
If God exists and you don't believe, you're going to be in trouble, and so on. Okay.
Right.
And so I get that argument. But now this is where my purity strand comes in, my truth strand comes in, whereby I say, is it okay to believe in something that is false if I reap functional benefits from it? And it's a tough one, right? Because if you have a 4-year-old child that, God forbid, is stricken with cancer.
God forbid.
Exactly. I used it advisedly precisely because we're talking about that. Usually I would flippantly say Darwin forbid. But so God forbid he is stricken with cancer. Boy, is it a lot easier to navigate through this infinite cruel reality if I believe in a God. Because God calls his angels to be closer to him, because God works in mysterious ways. There is a plan as to why little Timmy died of leukemia. Boy, that's easier than saying random shit happens and tough luck for Timmy. And that's just what it is. And so there are so many functional reasons for why people believe. And therefore, Blaise Pascal said, so just shut up and believe.
That's really interesting. So here's another angle on that. So perspectives. So the irony is, I think that Richard Dawkins understands all the pieces that add up to why religion is a thing. And I don't know why the hostility. So Richard Dawkins introduces the idea of memes, that there are things that will travel across time because they're, this is my interpretation of the point, but they are simplified enough that they can transmit very easily. And you get this thing that becomes a self-replicating idea. And anybody that's been on the internet knows exactly what a meme is at a gut level. Religion takes the most important ideas, many universal, some specific to the time, but then package it up in a meme so that everything has an answer to, well, why should I do that? So for instance, don't eat pork. Why don't eat pork? Probably because of, is it trichinosis?
Yeah.
So that's probably what they were actually protecting against. But if you say Yahweh says don't eat pork.
Well, sorry, can I interrupt you?
Please.
They didn't know why it is, and that's precisely why it is placed on the broad shoulders of some divine edict.
Exactly.
And so it's not that they knew that there is a biological reason, but decided to usurp it and attribute it to God. It's precisely, and the reason forgive me for having interrupted you.
Not at all.
In the Consuming Instinct, I have a section where I argue for exactly what you just said, but instead of the prohibition of eating pork, I use the eating of shellfish in kosher laws and Jewish, right? So here's what happens. You're walking around in the Middle East. You can't tell by looking at something or smelling it or the water that it came from whether it is infected or not. Therefore, there is no way for there to be a statistical regularity for me to be able to predict if it's this color, I die. If it's that color, I don't die. Rather, what happens is I consume it. And in many, many cases, I keep walking in the desert. And in a few cases, I drop dead very quickly. Therefore, since I can't map a cause and effect mechanism as to when that happens, then the final place that I lay it on are the broad shoulders of God. And so in that case, what I did is I offered a very clear and very compelling biological explanation of why that edict arose. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, that's what you said far more eloquently than I could, exactly where I was headed, is that when you don't know what it is, then you need a way to transmit that idea that's going to have meme qualities.
Exactly.
And the fastest thing is God said that to do it, right?
Exactly.
And so the question becomes, did that start in an oral tradition? Or was there a guy that was like, man, these motherfuckers just will not stop eating shrimp, right? And so they're like, I'm going to have God say, probably not. It's probably one of those things where
Exactly.
it just slowly finds its way in and it's passed on, passed on, passed on. But as it narrows down to God says don't eat shellfish, it just becomes very easy for that now to propagate like wild. And it has an advantage because now people aren't dying from whatever the problem is.
Exactly right.
If you like that clip, check out another powerful clip right here, and I'll see you there.